Hi, my name is Benedict, and today we're going with a pumpkin-coloured room because this is all about being spicy. I know, it's embarrassing. Right, we're going to take this sound, which is a bit predictable, and I'm going to show you how you can really spice it up without doing the obvious and incredibly thoughtless using the Unison button. And we need to be really aware of this because there's a lot of stuff that I hear because I'm constantly exposed to indie bands trying to get noticed. And you know what? Just about every one of them sounds like this. And they all seem to be trying to outdo themselves with sort of how far they can detune and how far they can spread, assuming that this is going to make them sound different. And you know what? It doesn't work. It worked for the first few people who did it, but after that, it just becomes boring because it's a thoughtless thing to do. There's no magic in it because it's just the very same thing. Imagine while we all love McDonald's chips with the chicken thing on it, would you only and ever want to eat them? After a little while, you'd be like, no, can I have them chips from somewhere else? Or maybe not chips. So this idea that we all should fit this one formula sounds really bad. And a lot of the reason that people go for the one formula sound is because they've just got no sense of how to create their own melange of spices. And that is truly sad. Let's look at some much better ways in which you can create a sound which is individual. It's not about saying hit these settings and you'll be golden, because that's absolutely not what I'm about. I loathe presets. Somebody was asking me about more presets for Hertz multiplier, and I was just like, oh my embarrassment, you obviously didn't watch the video. Let's look at what we can do. So we've got the usual suspects of an arpeggiator. There's already some spice happening over here, with a little bit of tape and a little bit of the old soft tube saturation knob. They commonly sit in my masters. The saturation knob is always on, and the scream comes in when it's time to finalize a track. This is just here to catch any excitement that happens, because if possible, we could get excited. But spicy and loud are not the same thing, and a lot of people go loud because they haven't created an independent spiciness. Now, the spiciness that we get in a Toto record or a Prodigy record are different. They might both be using the same synthesizer. They might both have been using a Jupiter 8, a real one even. But it's not the Jupiter 8, it's what gets done between that and your ears that makes the difference between Toto and the Prodigy. I think there's something else in there as well, but get my point, that we can use the same gear and get very different results, but it's in what we do with it. So we've got this rather predictable sort of thing. We don't want to be doing this because it's thoughtless, and while it sounds impressive immediately, it goes nowhere. There's no movement. Let's look at movement. The obvious things that people also do is to put a little bit of drive on here. That's the equivalent to what we've done here, and yes, it perks things up a little bit, but we're not going to dig into that. I'll leave it on now. We'll look at then, people will attach pitch randomization, obviously a little excessive at the moment, but to give you a sense of where randomizing each note is triggering at a different pitch, creating that sense of analog movement. Let's pull that down, so because it's a bass line, we can actually have a fair amount of movement, more than if we were playing a melodic sound. The girls are playing games in the other room if you hear their laughter. One that people forget to do a lot of times is moving the filter, because while analog creates instability in tuning, it actually creates instability in every knob. At least in an idealized analog universe, every knob is constantly moving itself a little bit. So why do we not move our filter a little bit? That's probably a bit much. But on each keystroke, we can move our filter just a master control for that. And here that is not super audible. We go from predictably flat to having a little bit of movement in there, from some vibrance. If we put back our we've now got a fair amount more movement. It then just dawned on me, hang on, it's common for people to pop in soft clipping to make that initial wave sound meatier, manlier, more analogy, because that was quite common. Waves were never what they told us what they were. It was like, ooh, that's pretty broken if you really looked at them. So yes, that's cool. That helps with some sense of authenticity. But what if we move that as well? I don't realistically think that the level is necessarily going to be different on each key press. Maybe it is. But I thought in this instance, why don't we apply an LFO to the amount of modulation? Yes, you can see that I'd set it up here to work. But from here, I can actually control everything with my master knob. So we're setting it up that there's a little bit of movement here. That's coming from a random LFO. You can hear that's really quite dramatic. Obviously, we're overdoing it. If we pull that back so that it's not what we might say something we can tell, oh, well, sometimes it's a square wave. Now look at this master control. Sound goes pretty flat. Now becomes, ooh, hang on. Benedict's got a TB303. And this is not about emulating TB303s, nor do I think this necessarily sounds like a perfect TB303 at all. That's not the point. Is there a diode in here? No, there isn't. But that we've got that movement, which the TB303 had plenty of. I don't know whether it was just because they were pretty crappy components or what, but that thing was very mobile. So we've now got this really mobile sound. Flat and predictable, boring. Now it's kind of moving and dribbling and wobbling all over the place. But it doesn't sound stupid, thoughtless, lo-fi, and unisonated. Even here, it sort of goes, yes. And it becomes, ooh, with the stupid unison on. So this is where we get our pumpkin spice from. By putting in the time and energy to create our own movement, the way in which we apply that movement is going to be on us. Just saying, oh, well, I'll go and buy the pro synth that has the proper amount of built in. You're not really suited to this job. Get yourself a sound developer to do this stuff for you. Get yourself a proper mix engineer. That's fine. You don't have to be dedicated to this stuff. But bring in somebody who is, so this way your sound becomes a result of the different decisions that you make for yourself. Hear how that sound now kind of, it's going to have a lot more presence in the mix because it's always that little bit different, making us always go, it's over there now, it's over there now. Remember, we're designed to chase rabbits in the undergrowth, and rabbits don't stand still. If they stand still, we lose them, which is why some critters go stock still when they think that something might be stalking them, because most hunters are designed to spot movement. Therefore, if you go, then it's entirely possible you won't get spotted. It's even in us humans. I froze with fear. That's a really basic sort of like, if I'm not moving, they won't see me. And you might be lucky. But this applies to when people are listening to your music. If your music's not moving, if your sounds are not moving, they won't hear them. So you need to keep them moving. And this takes us from pretty flat, if we were to get rid of this as well, adding that movement, bringing this in. Okay, we get a little bit of a timbral change with that, but such is. That's part of why that works. We've now got this kind of movement. And I didn't think to do it before, but it just suddenly dawned on me that it's like, what if we moved the wave shape a little bit? Yes, we've been doing that actually for ages by just sort of meddling with this in one form or another, normally with wavetable-y. But it sounds awfully digital. And that's cool, that's what you're looking for. I guess that, but this is that point of, even if we're doing that and we want our digital sound to continue to cut and seem really spicy without it being this formula, like, oh God, not another unison spread sound. 3 tiny moves here, randomizing pitch, randomizing the filter frequency, and the LFO of the changing the soft clippy. And if we make it just the soft clippy, if anything, it's possibly the most exciting of those. Maybe I'm saying that because it's just the thing I've just like, ooh, that's kind of cool. But when I overdid it the first time with my speakers, because I can hear very little in these things, it actually had quite a noticeable impact on the sound pressure level. I'm not talking about volume, but that perceived pressure. It was almost a little bit like, being in an elevator where you're suddenly confused about air pressure and what have you. It felt a little bit like that. That's disconcerting when you do it wrong, like all these horrible mixes that are up at a dynamic range of 1 dB. They're running at like 40 LUFs of like 1 or something absurd. And there's a lack of dynamic range. I actually feel like I'm being pressurized, put in the garbage compactor without the bendy stick. Star Wars. There's a tiny bit of that, but kind of in a good way. So this is a great way to get movement. And the thing that I was actually really setting out to play with, but took me some time to get around to doing, because I found this thing and thought, ooh, hello, it was the idea of sweeper. And I've spoken about similar sorts of things before. Yes, it changes the timbre slightly, but remember, the same Jupiter 8 used by Toto, I bless the rains down Africa. Sorry, that was the Sid Vicious version. And Prodigy. It's the same Jupiter 8, but they come across as very, very different. It's because of what they do to them. So any sense that, we must be, because it's and this sort of sense of, if we change something, we'd be ruining it. It's like, no, your job's to stamp your soul on this thing. We can use something like a phaser, very light phaser. That's clearly phasering. That's not doing anything, but a little bit, tiny bit. People aren't going to notice the difference because they're not A-Bing. And then rather than using an even LFO, we either use random LFO, but I didn't want to in this case. I wanted to try with an envelope that's mobile. It can be any sort of shape that you want. It can be a repetitive shape if you want, preferably not locked to BPM, because A, that is just horribly predictable, and B, it makes your sound, while you think it's constantly moving, it's like after the first couple of bars, because people go, I've heard that before. It's not to say you can't or shouldn't do it, but you need to be really careful. So if I speed that up, that's just showing you, okay, there's all that kind of movement there. We'll pull this right back again. You don't really know that it's there. If this was not visible on the screen, and I was just be working along, chances are no one would have said to themselves, oh, look, Benedict's running a phaser in there. Maybe if you're some kind of obsessed with a TB303 kind of a nut, and you're sitting here listing off all the reasons why my not attempting to sound like a TB3 doesn't sound like a TB3, maybe you would have gone, well, there must be a phaser in there too. But we're interested in music fans, not in, well, train spotters. If we were to take our sound here, get rid of all of the analogizer, hear how we've got movement. So by putting in a mix, as long as we've got our tone as a result of our phaser fitting where the mix is going, that is going to sound really vibrant and therefore really quite spicy. Of course, we can then EQ to taste, which is all somewhat pointless in the situation because we have nothing to EQ to. Better if we're on the track that we're on. But if we want to do those sorts of things. Suddenly we've got so many layers of small movement that the brain, even if it's sort of aware that, or able to consciously cotton onto that, oh, well, there's some kind of movement being made here, it becomes so complex that, as I said, unless they're a train spotter, they're actually going to put that aside and just go, that's a really interesting sound. I got to watch that one. And they will follow it, but unconsciously, just as we unconsciously follow something that has been of interest to us. We were coming back from the big smoke on the train the other week, and one of the girls suddenly bursts out laughing uncontrollably at the other one, and eventually we discovered that what had happened was that the younger one was looking at the older one, who was looking out the window, and as probably the power poles were going past, her eyes were flicking like this. And she wasn't aware that was what was happening. And about a couple of seconds, I sort of go, being the young little guy, I worked out what's happening, that this is what's happening. Her eyes are just doing this, as they're probably seeing the power pole, follow it, because it's beside her, and then flick back to get the next one. So it's doing this. This is what we naturally do. The older one wasn't aware of the fact that she was even doing it, that her eyeballs were doing this. So we get enough movement in here. We just get this really spicy seeming sound without having put ourselves through boring unison spreaders, wide, this, that, and the other, or anything. Now that makes it so much easier for us to add in. Okay, that's pretty cool. And notice here, by turning off the BPM sync and finding somewhere where I like the way that it grooves and it creates, ooh, that's a characterful, spicy sort of a groove. I've given this so much more roll and impact. If we'd stayed with the everything's perfectly where it should be because everybody uses 3/16, how annoying is it? I hear tracks and it's just like, oh. It's not like I'm going, oh, that's 3/16, but it's like every track's got the same delay time on every instrument. And the same ducking So every time the kick drum comes in, the whole rest of the track disappears, and it's just like, there's no spice in here. It's just you dumped a whole pile of salt on top and told me, yeah, spicy, dude. We've all been to restaurants like that. You go and you have your vindaloo, and all you taste is salt. Do you go back? No. Do you tell your mates to go back? No. You actually tell your mates to avoid it because it's like the salt capital. So now we have a pretty spicy sort of a sound without using unison, width, or anything at all. No popping around of ping pongs or... It's actually better without that. And because our delay is somewhere around the time, it's creating this interesting sort of jumping polyrhythm. We could get into it and work out what division of a beat it is, but who cares? That's for a musicologist to talk about in 20, 30 years about how brilliant you were because you simply were smart enough to turn off sync and find where it got funk and groovy. And that all depends on your piece. So at no point should you be taking, well, he used that setting, so I'm going to do it in mine. I will never do that kind of stuff. Matter of fact, there was somebody in a, what was it? Logic group, I think, talking about, oh, well, I've got this album I'm mixing for somebody, and I've mixed the first track, and I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's kind of okay. Can I make a template of everything I did in this mix? So all I have to do is swap the stems for each of the other tracks for this album, put them in here, and the mixes will be done for me, and they'll all be like at least as good as this one. And he couldn't seem to understand that quite a lot of people were stupidly just giving him the technical formula for how to do this. But surely the technical formula for that would be save your file off with all of your settings, but just strip the audio files and then open it up and stick the audio files in. But my answer was like, why would you want to do this? I said, as a professional mix engineer, I wouldn't do it. If I paid someone to mix my record, I wouldn't want them doing it. If I had staff and I found one of them doing it, they would not be my staff in 10 minutes' time. And between my finding it out and them walking out, it would be 10 minutes of me shouting at them about how they're not fit to be an engineer. Because this concept of formula, of being on the grid, it's so damaging. There is no spice in it. Absolutely none. We go to different restaurants because we want a different experience. We listen to different records because we want a different experience. We're looking for new records that give us a new experience. We are not out there looking for records that sound exactly the same as. What if somebody put out a record that was the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Spars? We'd be like, fuck off. Who wants that? Go buy the Bowie record, listen to that, because that's bloody brilliant. There's like spice for miles on that. I'm listening to that, it was 72 when that came out? I think it was 72. I was too young to be into it when it came out, but I've been listening to that since... I'm not sure when I got that record myself, but I was listening to the songs definitely by 82, when I was really listening to the radio, really, really consciously, like, so 82, 92, 02, 12, 22, so 40 years I'm listening to that record, and you know what? The spice has never worn off on that thing. There is no formula in that. Those songs became a leader for other people, for Roxy, for Ultravox, for Gary Newman, for bloody everybody who was listening to Ziggy and the Spiders and going, how do I do that? It's what you see here. Ignore the formulas. Work out how to make your sound move without people realizing consciously that it's moving, which is often by having 3 or 4 things meandering around each other and including things like your echoes, which place something in space, and making sure that they move around as well. We could actually turn these down, and that's still an interesting sound. Turn that off now. Yeah, we've got two different feels. We're asking the person to set a different scene, tell a different story, just with those little moves there. And there are all kinds of different stories that we can tell with where we put things, how we put them, all those little choices that we make. All change the story. That's where your spice is. So hopefully you have understood why I chose pumpkin colour for this video. If you have any questions, ask them on down below. And most importantly, seeing this is what I do for my coins, if you want assistance with doing this sort of stuff, if you want it done for you, if you want to improve your record, whether that's through hiring me to mix it for you, singles or EPs or albums, or to really dig in as a record producer to help you go, ooh, let's do this, that, and the other. Let's make all these little alterations to make it really stand out. You know, so you can have your own run at making your own spiders from Mars. Down below, go to the website, work your way through so that you understand who I am, how I work. You should have a lot of it if you watched this far. Invested 26 minutes and 54 seconds. Then reach out, let me know what you got, and we'll have a conversation and go from there. Most importantly, have a great day.